Hi.
Hello, everyone. We have 9 participants now. Hi, everyone. 10 now. Hi, guys. So sorry. So sorry we started a bit late. We had a few technical difficulties, but we're here. We're excited to talk about trauma. Welcome, everyone. I'll just give it a few, like a minutes for more people to join. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Grab a chair, grab a chair. Grab a chair. How's everyone doing today? Hope you guys are well. Amazing. Okay, I think we have we have 16. I'll just start when we have like 20 people.
Okay.
Yeah. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm good. I was a little bit anxious because of the bad internet. I was so worried. I was like, are we going to have to cancel? Do we have to reschedule what's going on? So it got me a little frazzled, but I'm so glad that everything is sorted and we're live now. So let's just hope for consistency.
Hello, everyone on YouTube. We have people on YouTube watching as well. Hi, everyone that's watching us on YouTube. Welcome. So sorry we started a bit late. We had some technical difficulties. All right, I'm going to welcome everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Faye Bello. I work at Oando PLC. I work with the Government and External Relations team, but mental health and all things mental health, wellness are very important to me. So I'm here talking to the incredible Amanda, who we've been speaking to for the past 3 weeks. Is our third session together. We talked about blackouts. No, not blackouts, burnout. The first time. Then we talked about depression. And now we're talking about trauma. So just in case you're new and you haven't met Amanda, Amanda is an incredible psychotherapist, right? Am I right? A psychotherapist?
Yes, you are.
Yay, awesome. And she runs a company called Inquires, and she's just this incredible person. You may have seen her, this viral video that went this viral interviews that she did with Ibuka on Rubbing Minds that was just so iconic. So this October, like we said, Oando has embarked on the Oando Wellness series, and it's basically just conversations around all things mental health. And we're really grateful for this platform. You can join us on social media using hashtag Oando Wellness series and join the conversation and just leave comments in the chat and also ask questions in the Q&A. And don't worry, if you're on YouTube, we've got you covered. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and we'll be sure to get to you as well. All righty. So today we're talking about trauma, and approximately 70% of adults have been exposed to at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. Although the majority of the individuals they'll be able to absorb the trauma over time, many survivors have experienced long-lasting problems. 1 in 13 survivors develop post-traumatic stress disorder, which is PTSD, and at some point in their lives. So Amanda, I'm going to hand it over to you to speak more on this topic, because I'm really excited to be speaking with you. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Honestly, thank you. And I'm so glad that we're talking about trauma because for like the past, I've been practicing for about 5 years now. And a lot of the work I do, one of my specialties is treating post-traumatic stress disorder. And I realized now, and I'm about to do my PhD. I want to start my PhD from next year. And I've realized that what I really want to do is I want to focus on trauma here in Nigeria and the effect it has on people. So when we talk about it more, what I want people to do is pay attention to all the things I'm saying, because a lot of you may be going through some kind of trauma, especially when we think about the parenting style that is part of the culture. The parenting culture in Nigeria is full of very many traumatic things that we think is okay, but it's actually traumatizing and affects us long term, even after we've grown up and we're adults. So the first thing we need to know is, what is trauma? Everyone talks about trauma. I was traumatized, but what really does trauma mean? So trauma is a response, it's an emotional response to a very, very stressful event. So you may be, let's say, driving in a car and you have an accident. The accident, you're trying to get out, get hospital care. That very experience of having an accident is so stressful that after the accident, you start to experience symptoms of trauma. You could have been like childhood trauma that people experience. You're growing up, you're a kid, children don't have the capacity to be able to deal with stress. So when you're being abused consistently, either you're physically abused or sexually abused or spiritually abused or emotionally abused over a long period of time, you can't cope with the stress. You then start to develop an emotional response to that highly stressful event. And that's what we call trauma. So trauma is really a response, an emotional and psychological response to an event that a person finds highly stressful. So if there is a war going on, you have people who suffer PTSD. And from the history of psychology, the awareness of PTSD started out with soldiers who had come back from the war in America, and they were showing symptoms of not being able to sleep, having panic attacks, night terrors. And because of that, people were wondering like what was going on. So first of all, it was called shell shock because it was mostly just focused on just people in the military. But now it's then been moved over to now understand that, okay, there is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it can affect not just people who have experienced war or been in the battlefront, but also people in their daily lives that have experienced things like accidents or even just a traumatic relationship or even in their childhood as well. Now, there are different types of traumas. Trauma doesn't necessarily always last for a very long period of time. You can have acute trauma, you can have chronic trauma, and then you can have complex trauma. Now, acute trauma is when you experience just one single event or a dangerous event. Let's say you were just walking down the road and a bike hit you. That's it. And then you start to develop an emotional response to that event. That's acute trauma. And it doesn't have to be long term. It could be like, it just happens over like a period of 2-3 weeks, and then you start to feel better, and then you're okay. And you overcome it, and then your emotional response is a bit more balanced. You can go outside, you can take bikes, you can be fine. But then there is chronic trauma. And what chronic trauma is that you have been repeatedly for a long period of time exposed to a highly stressful event. And that's where we put in the category of childhood trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence. So people that have experienced chronic trauma, people who have been in traumatic situations for a long period of time. Then we have complex trauma. And what complex trauma is experiencing multiple traumatic events. And I think, and this is the one that is most interesting to me, because I feel that a lot of us as Africans, not even just Nigerians, have experienced some kind of complex trauma. First of all, we had the slave trade, then we had colonial issues, then we had civil wars, then we had changes in hands in government, then we had internal battles, tribal issues, and we have parenting problems. So it's like one traumatic event happened, then another traumatic event happened, then another traumatic. So there is never really any time to recover from any of them, any of the traumatic events we experience as a people before another thing then comes on top of it. So some people can have acute trauma, you can have chronic trauma, and then you can have complex trauma. So if you relate to any of them, please feel free to, share in the comment section. So there's also another kind of trauma, which is called vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. This is when and this is also common with therapists as well, which is why we try to tell ourselves like you need to take breaks from work to be on your own and, separate yourself from a person, like separate yourself from the situation. Now, the way vicarious trauma works is that you are probably caring for a person who has been traumatized. Let's say your friend was abused sexually and you have to be present for them and take care of them and support them and look after them. But then in the process of doing that, you then start to develop the symptoms of trauma that as a result of coming in close contact. So mental health professionals like me, family members, if your family member was in an accident and you're taking care of them, you also can then develop the symptoms of the traumatic event. So I want you guys, as I'm telling you these things, I really want you to sit back and think about it and reflect on your own to know, okay, is there anyone in my family?
I said you're definitely hitting on some
very important points.
Honestly.
But yeah. So if you have like any family member, let's say a friend of yours was sexually abused and he came to talk to you about it and you had to be there to take care of them and to look after them and support them. And then all of a sudden you start to realize that even me self, like I'm afraid of going outside. I'm afraid of doing certain things that I'd normally be able to do because, I'm feeling like agitated, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling anxious and experiencing the symptoms. I will tell you about the symptoms later on. Then you may be experiencing secondary trauma. It didn't happen to you, but then you are now having the symptoms of the person experiencing it. You can also be traumatized from watching another person be traumatized. So you don't have to be a direct, like you're not experiencing it directly, but then because you're watching somebody else go through something traumatic, you then end up experiencing trauma, because the process of watching someone go through a highly stressful event can then cause you to develop the symptom, because that is also stressful for you to watch. Like if you're sitting now and you're watching someone get beat, that can cause you, like children, for example, that grow up in a home where there's domestic violence, the parent who is abusive may not be hitting the kids, but they may be hitting the parent, but then it's the kids then develop trauma. So they have a negative emotional response to observing another person be traumatized. So don't think that, okay, because it didn't happen to me, why should I be traumatized? No, you can develop trauma from just watching somebody else experience trauma. So yeah, so that's pretty much what trauma is. And before I go into the symptoms, I just want to know if anyone has any questions at all for me.
I guess I have a question actually. I guess the only question that comes to mind is, you know how in Nigeria there are a lot of traumatic incidents that happen to other people, where you hear someone's house got robbed, and then all of a sudden you start, your parents start to, nobody should do this, nobody should do that because of what happened to another person. Is that itself that's trauma, right? In a way.
Can you repeat that again? I think I lost
you.
Can
you hear me? I said when, so for example, there are situations where something bad happens to someone, and not you, but like, let's say, for example, your neighbor gets robbed.
Yeah.
And then in your house, everyone starts to act as though, it happened next door, it can happen to us, and that changes behavior within the home. That's trauma, right?
Yes. It could be a response. It could be an emotional response to that event. So it could be anxiety, it could be fear, it could be a desire to protect. But then there are some symptoms that trauma has. When I talk to you about the symptoms, then you'd be able to say, okay, fine, this is most likely a traumatized person. So think there's something can happen to somebody, like with human beings, for example. Whenever, I know people say it's inappropriate to ask this question, but somebody dies and everybody wants to know what killed them. The reason why most people are asking is because they want to know how they can prevent themselves from being in the same situation so they don't die. So it's like your own protective instinct. Like you want to make sure that you're okay and that what happens to that person does not happen to you as well. So that in itself cannot necessarily be a traumatic response, but it can be an emotional response to another person's traumatic event. Now, if you then start to experience the symptoms that that person is experiencing when they have gone through that traumatic event, then you can then start to say that, okay, you may have now developed trauma, like your response is now being able to be categorized under, this is a response, it's a trauma response. Yeah. So let me tell you what some of the symptoms are. So the symptoms can range from very mild to very severe. So before you can be classified as having post-traumatic stress disorder, you need to have had the symptoms of trauma for a period more than a month. So if something happens to you today and you're experiencing the symptoms, which are usually like denial, anger, fear, anxiety, nightmares, being startled, I'll break them down for you. So if the moment you start to experience, like if you experience for a week, we'll say you have acute stress disorder. If it goes for 2 weeks, we'll say, okay, fine, that's still acute stress. But if after 1 month after the event, you are still experiencing those same symptoms, then we'll say, okay, fine, this person most likely has PTSD. And the thing about PTSD is that the symptoms don't necessarily have to manifest themselves immediately. You can be going through life and think you're okay. And then it's when you're much older or like years later that then the symptoms then start to manifest, which is why some people experience childhood trauma, but they don't know that they have been traumatized by their childhood. But when they now start to try to get into relationships, hold a job down, do things that help them function as adults, they realize, when I'm in this situation, this is how I react. When this happens, this is what happens to me. When they start to experience the symptoms of trauma. So for some people, it can be very mild, and then in about a day or 2 days, they'll be over it, they'll be fine. And then for some people, it can be really severe and that it would destabilize them and they are not able to function daily. They can't leave their house. They're crying all the time. They can't sleep. They can't eat. And it paralyzes them. So some of the things that factors that affect how a person responds to trauma is, number one, the person's emotions and their mental health. So the characteristics of a human being, we're all different people. For some people, they can experience an accident and it's like, Odeshi. But then for some other people, they will experience that same accident and the response they have to it is far much more severe than others. So it doesn't help that when, like in a family now, there's probably abuse going on, child abuse, physical abuse, your parents are hitting you all the time, verbally abusing you. The first child, let's say there are 3 children, the first child may be okay, the second child may cope better, but then the third child would not do very well with it. And then everyone is like, well, I came out fine, so why is it different for you? We all went through the same thing, so why is it that it's affecting you more? Why is your own more than everybody's own? People are different. So there are some factors that really determine how a traumatic event is going to affect a person. So number one, it is the characteristics of the person. What are they able to handle? How do they cope with stress? What is their emotional predisposition? What is their personality like? The second is, do they already have other mental health issues existing? So if you're a person who already struggles with anxiety or depression, or even like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, your response to trauma and how it affects you will be different from a person who doesn't have any mental health conditions. There's also the factor of previous exposure to traumatic events. So if you experience a traumatic event before, it will definitely affect how you respond to another traumatic event again. Then there's also the type of event and the characteristics of the event that happened. So is it something that was really big, let's say like an explosion happened, or is it something that was really small, like let's say you were walking and almost got hit by a car? So if it wasn't too big and it's something that you as a person you can handle, then the symptoms of the fact that you'd experience would be a lot more less. But if it's something that is so big that you can't handle it, the symptoms would definitely be far much more severe for you. And then there's also the part of how do you handle your emotions? Are you the type of person that when something happens, what you do is you suppress your emotions, you deny it, and you pretend like, oh, that was nothing at all. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to keep on moving on. People who tend to do that don't process their emotions well, and are not able to ask themselves and answer themselves when it comes to how did that event affect you and how are you doing? So the way you approach handling your emotions also then determines how you're going to respond when a traumatic event happens. So people are different and people will respond differently, even if it is to the same traumatic event that you've had. Yeah. So some of the symptoms that we find that people have when they've experienced trauma, some of the emotional responses are denial. So number one, okay, it didn't happen. That's just, I'm just going to move on from it. That did not happen at all. Some people experience anger. They become very angry and irritable. There is then fear, which is that fear of going outside of your house, the fear of, I need to close all my windows, the fear of I can't drive in a car, depending on what the traumatic event was. There is then sadness, because something bad has happened to you, you would definitely feel sad about it. There is a feeling of shame. Shame because you feel that, oh, I could have done something different, or it was my fault that this happened to me. And we tend to see a lot of shame when it comes to people who have experienced sexual assault. They don't want to talk about it because they feel that it was something that they had done to bring upon something that society would stigmatize them for. So there's a lot of shame that goes around talking about sexual assault or sexual abuse for both men and women, especially with men, because how will a man come out and say, I've been sexually assaulted, especially when they've been sexually assaulted by a woman. And if they've been sexually assaulted by a man, it then brings into the question of what is my sexuality, all of that. So there's a lot of shame that comes up as a result of that. So there's confusion that can come up as well, which is like, why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong? Is this my fault? Did this really even happen? I don't know what to do. I can't think straight. I can't focus. I can't concentrate. Some people end up developing anxiety. Some people end up developing depression. Some people become completely numb, like they can't feel anything at all. No matter what happens, since that event happened, they are numb to their emotions. Something could be happening down the road and everyone is panicking, but that person is just like, I feel nothing. Then there's a feeling of guilt, which is a sense of responsibility. Should I have driven the car to the left? Should I have done this? Should I have done that? If I had done this, this wouldn't happen. And the thing about guilt is tied to a sense of responsibility. So you feel that if you had been present enough, active enough, protective enough, maybe this negative thing that happened to you or this bad experience would never have happened at all. Then there is a hopelessness, which is that, since this has happened, there is nothing that I can do about it. There is no point existing in life. There is no point being here. What is the point of existence? What is the point? What is the meaning of life? So you lose hope and the desire to want to continue to live life going forward since that happened. Then there is irritability, which goes along with anger. You're easily triggered by anything and you burst out. So someone touches you and you're like, what is going on here? You're snappy, you're frustrating. People find it very difficult to be around you. They're walking around eggshells around you. And then there's that difficulty with concentrating. So you can't really focus because you've experienced something that's so overwhelming and so stressful. How would you be able to pay attention to the details of the things that you need to do? You need clarity of mind to be able to concentrate. So when you don't have that clarity of mind, you're going to be very confused. You're going to find it difficult to do work, to even just do basic chores. You may even find yourself daydreaming, spacing out, like you're standing there and your mind just wanders off to an entirely different place. You're not present. Some people tend to dissociate when they've experienced trauma. They're not present. You'd be like, you become a fayi, and they'll be like, what happened? And it's like almost as if they just checked back into reality. Some people have emotional outbursts where, because they find it so difficult to cope with how they feel, you can just be asking them something or something little would just happen, and then next thing they're having a breakdown and they're screaming and crying and yelling and probably even having a panic attack because of what happened. So emotional outbursts because they find it difficult to cope with how they feel and even to express how they feel. They also have flashbacks where they find themselves reliving the traumatic event all over again. So they could be sitting down and a smell that reminds them of what happened can just whiff through their nose, and it's almost like it's taking them back to the place where they were before. They could even hear a sound that sounds similar. I remember I was working with, after the explosion happened, I think 2 years ago, there was a secondary school that had like a fuel explosion, and some kids died in the school. And I was working with one of the kids, her parents had brought her in for therapy, and we were just sitting on outside a very peaceful environment. And all of a sudden, a lizard just jumped and hit a plant, and the plant fell down. And if you see the way this girl jumped up, it was almost as if she was back in that same situation where she had heard the explosion the first time. She was so shocked and so afraid that I had to help her, like, okay, calm down. It's okay, you're not in the same place anymore. The same thing isn't happening to you. It's fine. So people would have flashbacks, and these flashbacks, apart from happening when they're awake, could also manifest as nightmares. So you'd be sleeping at night, and then all of a sudden in your dreams, you are reliving the experience of that traumatic event all over again. So you find it difficult to sleep. So you struggle with insomnia because you're afraid to sleep, because you think if you sleep, the same thing that happened to you before, you're going to dream about it at night. And nobody wants to relive a traumatic event. It was too stressful. It was too jarring. Why would I want to put myself back in that situation all over again? Now, apart from some of the emotional responses that people have, people also have physical responses to it. They start to have headaches or migraines, the head starts to hurt. Then it affects their gut. They have gut issues, digestive symptoms, they can't keep food down, they're vomiting all the time, their stomach is hurting, they start to feel fatigued, they're tired all the time. Anything that happens, they are so weak, they can barely get work done. They would much rather just lay in bed and just sleep because they are too tired to do it. They don't have the energy, mental, emotional, or physical. Then they have a racing heart. Their heart is always just beating really fast, just all the time. They're like agitated and anxious and, sweating, and then they feel jumpy. So someone could just be walking around and just tap them lightly on the shoulder and they're like, oh my goodness, what happened? What's that? So any little thing, they're jumpy, they're scared, and they're afraid. So those are some of the physical responses they have. They can become hyper vigilant, looking out for very little signs of trouble, little signs. So even things that are not trouble become a troubling situation for them. Or it's hyper arousal. They are very, very sensitive to anything. A little sound will wake them up. A little noise, even if it's a dog barking, they are up and they are awake and they are alert, just looking around for any possible sign of danger. If you're in an accident before and you get into a car and the car even just makes one weird sound. Let's say you're on third mainland, and you know that third mainland has some of those like bridge brakes that will, as soon as you just go through one, your heart's racing and you feel like, oh my goodness, the car is about to, you know, crash or something is about to happen. So you're very jumpy, you're very unsettled, you're hyper aroused, you struggle to sleep, you're in a constant state of alertness, and you're just very, very uncomfortable with yourself. And if you don't talk about the problems or even talk about the experience you had, it makes the symptoms last for a longer period of time, and it can affect you, your ability to work, your ability to build and sustain relationships, and even take care of yourself. And not taking care of your PTSD can devolve into you developing other illnesses, mental illnesses, or emotional disturbances for you. Yeah. So those are some of the symptoms. So I just want to know if anyone has any questions that they want to ask before I continue.
We have a question in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Is feeling a sense of responsibility for most things a form of trauma? There was a conversation on Twitter recently about the burden of being the firstborn child in an African family and how the sense of responsibility firstborn children feel must be a form of trauma. Ooh, yeah. I didn't feel this one.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that that is a form of trauma, but I think that it can be a symptom of like a traumatic experience. So constantly being put under pressure, constantly being held like to high expectations, constantly being told like, well, you're the firstborn, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. It may not be a trauma. I wouldn't say, okay, that's PTSD, that's a symptom of PTSD. But I'd say that it could be like one of the experiences of growing up in a family where you have a lot of pressure. So there are some other things that need to be considered apart from just that sense of responsibility. What else accompanied that experience? What was the context of your own environment before we then say, okay, that was traumatizing, that's trauma itself. So let's just say, yeah, that is a stressful situation, and that guilt is very common. I know a lot of first daughters and first sons who struggle with that sense of guilt of, I need to be the one to take care of everybody in the family. It could be even a symptom of depression itself, that feeling of guilt. So before we categorize it and say, okay, yes, this is it, this is trauma, this is a trauma response, let's think about other things that happened in the environment and then say, okay, this is a symptom of PTSD. This is a symptom of you being in a situation that was too stressful for you to cope. And now as a way of responding and coping, what you think is like you have a sense of responsibility to save or to help people. Is there any other question?
I have a few questions here, just in case that no one else wants to ask. So the first question here is trauma always caused by negative experiences, or are there other triggers?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, hello. I said the first question says, is trauma always caused by negative experiences?
Yes.
Or are there other triggers? So it's just negative experiences.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I'm here to hear of anyone who had a positive experience that traumatized them.
Right. Knowing that humans go through a myriad of negative events over the course of their lives, how can people ascertain which events are indeed traumatic?
I think it's also like looking at your emotional responses to that event and how you feel after the event happened. Do you feel sad? Do you feel anger? Do you feel fear? Do you have nightmares? Are you struggling with sleep? Do you feel dizzy? Do you feel nauseous? Has your appetite changed? Do you feel like you have issues with your gut? So it's just looking at the way you're responding to that event. If you're put in the same situation again, or you feel the same experience, you're experiencing that same thing all over again, how do you respond to it? And it also really does help to speak to a professional to know these things, because the thing about diagnosing mental illnesses and also categorizing things as traumatic is that there's so much in the context that needs to be taken into consideration. We can't just take one thing and say, okay, this is trauma, because it could be a symptom of something else that makes you think that you're traumatized, because the symptoms of trauma are very much similar to symptoms of depression and symptoms of anxiety. So we need to be very careful before we label and say, okay, this is a traumatic event. So you need to speak to a professional for them to help you identify and say, okay, that was traumatizing for you. And because what could be traumatizing for you could not be traumatizing for somebody else. So you'd need to talk to a professional to help you categorize it and say, okay, fine, we think that you're definitely struggling with PTSD as a result of this experience, and this was traumatizing for you. So let's not just be quick to label any negative response we have to an event as trauma. It may not be trauma, it could be a symptom of something else that is manifesting the same symptoms that you may consider as trauma. It could even just be a response to stress, because trauma is a stressful situation. It's a highly stressful situation. And stress on its own already comes with its own responses as an individual. When you're under a lot of stress, like burnout, for example, we can't say that because you're burnout, you're traumatized. There is a difference between burnout and a difference between trauma. But then when you look at the symptoms, like I told you before about the symptoms of trauma and the symptoms of burnout, some of them are quite similar. So you would need a professional to help you differentiate, to let you know that, okay, this is not trauma. This is just you undergoing chronic stress that is then causing you to respond in these particular ways. But then when you now start to fit certain criteria or have certain symptoms, then it'll tell you, okay, fine, that situation was traumatic for you, and that because it's lasted for such a long period of time, then we can then say you have PTSD, and we can then begin to treat you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Someone has asked, how do we heal from trauma? Do we always need a professional?
Do you always need a professional? Some people are good at healing themselves. I'll be very honest. Some people are good at doing self-healing work. But that self-healing work, what I say is that it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, because with trauma, when you have to heal, you need to confront the traumatic experience. So it's almost like, in a way, reliving what had happened to you, just so that you can be able to feel better. So you may not be able to handle it on your own, because the process of relieving it can then take you back to now re-experiencing some severe symptoms that you might have been able to overcome over time. So what I'd say is that speak to a professional, let them help you, let them guide you, let them help you with the tools that you would need, so that when you have to go back to that traumatic event and then deal with it, they would be able to help bring you out of it and put you in a place where you are stable and that you're comfortable. Like if you're a person who's dealt with sexual assault or even childhood abuse or sexual abuse, it can be, if I tell you to self-heal, that's a lot of work for you. So it'd be good to have a person who really understands and can help you navigate those feelings without you having to go back and then have to experience the symptoms of that traumatic experience all over again, and know how to like carry you from the beginning and take you down the end. So I highly recommend you deal with a professional. There are self-help books out there. There's information out there on YouTube, articles that you can read, especially if you're in a place where you can't afford or even access a therapist who is trauma informed, because it's not every therapist that works with trauma. Trauma is a very heavy, it's a very heavy thing to deal with, and not every therapist wants to go down that path. Just the same way I wouldn't treat schizophrenia. It's not my specialty. So if someone has schizophrenia, I'd refer you to another professional who specializes in that area. So if you need to work with a therapist who knows how to deal with trauma, so that they can be able to guide you throughout the nuances. They know, okay, if a person is responding this way or reacting this way, it's a symptom of their trauma, and there are some areas that they need to look out for that can help them understand how to cope better. So 100% recommend you with a professional. But if you think you can access and you can afford a professional, there are ways that you can help yourself. It would take longer and it wouldn't be easy, but in the long term, it's actually possible.
Winifred has left I'm very sad to hear this, Winifred. She said, I started typing a question and just couldn't get through it. I feel really tired and need help. I'm so sorry to hear that, Winifred.
Winnie, yeah, so sorry. Please feel free to reach out to me after this is over so that we can be able to talk a bit more, and I'll be able to help you get the help that you need, okay? It's okay. You can even share.
Would you like to speak? You can unmute. There are ways for you to speak. The admin will help with that. If you'd like to speak, just you can raise your hand. Yes. So if you raise your hand, we will let you speak. It's speaking is available. If you want to speak, just raise your hand on the, on Zoom, and then we'll just unmute you and you can speak. So let us know if that's something you'd rather do.
Yeah.
Leave it in a safe space. So
Yeah. So oh wow.
Oh, I was kidnapped in December, and I still have flashbacks and cannot enter a cab alone. How do I move forward?
Come to therapy.
Therapy?
Yeah, please come to therapy. I would not advise you to do this on your own. Please come to therapy. Let's talk about it and help you figure out how you can cope, because this is a unique situation. And if I tell you to handle it on your own, I don't know that you are equipped enough to do it. You'd be too scared to be able to, do the things that you need to do to help yourself get better. You need support. So please come to therapy. Come to therapy. I'm seeing another question. Speaking about professionals, how do you know when you need, when you need a psychiatrist? Okay, how do you know you need a psychiatrist or a therapist? The moment you feel like you're not okay, if your sleeping is not okay, if you're thinking negatively about yourself, if you're thinking negatively about other people, if you're thinking negatively about the world, I mean, I know the world is a bad place, but then it's also good. And a healthy mind is able to balance both of them, both the good and the bad. But if you notice that a lot of your thoughts are negative self-talk, negative talk to other people, negative perspective of the world, you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're struggling with focusing at work, you don't feel good, you don't feel happy, you find that you're jittery all the time and that you're restless, you don't want to sit one place, you have this idea of, or a strong desire to want to go away, far away, turn off your phone and just leave everybody. And that when you look into your life in detail, like maybe your family relationships, religion, sex, you look at your money, and in all these areas, you feel like you're not fulfilled or it's just not working out the way you want it to, then you should speak to a psychiatrist or a therapist. So when you don't feel good about the life that you're living and the person that you are in your body and in your existence, then you should talk to a therapist. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is the person from before said they tried once and it was too expensive and they can't afford it right now.
Okay, so what we do is that we have a free support group for people who are struggling with anxiety. It's not specifically for trauma, but it can be very helpful for you. And they meet once a month. And the facilitator for the support group for anxiety is a psychotherapist as well. So open sharing, you can talk about some of the issues you've experienced and they'll be able to help guide you through what you can do to help yourself get better. It's not a therapy session, it's a support group. So you will definitely be talking to other people who have experienced traumatic events or are struggling with anxiety. You can also go for the support group for depression. It's free, it's virtual. Wherever you are in the world, you can always access it. You can talk, and then the person who also facilitates that group is also a therapist, so they know how best to provide you with assistance. All you just need to do is show up and just share your experience. They'll be willing to listen and they'll be willing to help you. And even other people on the group that may have experienced the same thing you're experiencing will be there to support you and help you out with some tips that they've been using to help themselves cope. So if you have not been able to afford therapy, you can definitely join a free support group that would be helpful for you. I think I know some of I don't know if my colleague still does it right now.
Would you be able to leave links in the chat, Amanda? Would you be able to leave links in the chat?
Oh, of course. Let me just do that right now.
Yeah.
So the next meeting for anxiety is on the 30th of this month. So
leave your email address as well in the chat so people can contact you.
So this is my email address, and this is also the email address for the support group. So you can join. It's completely free. It's virtual. It's on Google Meets. Just go on the website, inquires.me/obodo, and join. We have one for October and another one for November. So you can show up and share, and the more you attend, people can at least follow up with you and say, okay, this is how I was doing last week. This is what I'm doing now. Keep in mind, it's not therapy, it's a support group. Therapy is a bit more unique and much more specified. but the support group can also be very, very, very helpful. Okay, I think I left it to just, okay, wait 1 second. Let me just retype this again. Ndidi.me/Obodo, and then Amanda@Ndidi.me, and then Obodo@Ndidi.me.
Perfection. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Any more questions?
If you have any questions, you can also raise your hands to ask questions live if you would like. I have a bunch of questions here. We can keep running through them. So one of the questions here I have is, how does one spot a possible trigger and guide the victim out of it in such a way that its negative impacts can be curbed or eliminated? How does one spot a possible trigger and guide the victim out of it in such a way that its negative impacts can be curbed or eliminated?
I think that if you notice that there is a trigger that's coming up, let's say, for example, if a person was sexually abused by a family member, and you know that you're going to like a family meeting and that person would most likely be there, the best thing to do is to make them aware of it. So just let them know, like, okay, this person, this thing is about to happen. How do you feel about it? Do you think it's something you can handle, or would you much rather not be there at all? I know that sometimes the best way people want to protect some people is to just not let them know about it at all. And that would be good if you know that this person does not really have the right coping skills, or they're not strong enough to be able to manage it. So you don't let them be aware of it, just remove them entirely from the situation. But if you think that, okay, they are strong enough, and they're well enough or stable enough to deal with this, just let them know, okay, this and this is about to happen, and I don't think you should be in this situation at all because it wouldn't be good for you. So take them away from that space and keep them calm. Breathing exercises are always very helpful, because when a person experiences a trigger, the next thing that happens is like most likely a panic attack or an anxiety attack, where they start to hyperventilate or they start to relieve those memories all over again. So the best thing to do is remove them from that space, whether they are aware of it or not. Remove them from that space, take them to a place where they feel safe, and then reassure them, tell them everything is going to be okay. Don't worry, you're not in the same situation again. You have support. I'm here for you. I'm going to support anything you need. Just tell me and I'll be here to provide it for you. And just guide them through breathing exercises. You can, if you notice that they are breathing and they are getting a little bit panicked, you can hold their hands and just tell them to like mimic my breathing. Or you can tell them, put your hand on my chest or my stomach and just breathe as I'm breathing. And then you slow your breathing down and then help them to slow their breathing down so that they're calm. And then just tell them things that are reassuring, like, don't worry, everything will be fine. You're not in the same situation again. You have support around you. There are people here who love you, who are caring for you, and that if it's like an accident that they've been in before and they're struggling to get into a car, you can go into the car with them and hold their hand throughout the experience, just helping them stay calm, say things that are reassuring to them. You can even distract them from their immediate environment by showing them like a funny video on YouTube or TikTok that they can be watching and make them laugh so that they feel calmer and they're able to go through it. But breathing is a very, very good way to help people stay calm whenever they are about to or have experienced a triggering event. Yes.
Okay. So do you want to go back to the lecture?
Yes. So
right.
I just want to share with you guys some examples of some traumatic experiences that people will experience, like potential things that can potentially cause you to be traumatized. So there's bullying in the workplace, bullying in school, bullying at home, bullying amongst friends. There is harassment. It could be physical harassment or sexual harassment, where people like either push you around to take stuff from you or touch you inappropriately. There's physical abuse, which is why I always tell people, don't hit your kids. If you have a child and you think that a way of disciplining your child is to flog them, that is physical abuse. You are abusing your child. I remember reading on Twitter one time of a girl that said her mother tied her hand and tied her leg and was beating her. And at that point, she thought she was going to die. She's an adult now. And I'm like, why would you? And what I always ask adults is this: the way you hit your child, if another adult hits you that way, would you be comfortable with that? What would you do? You would fight. So why would you think that it is okay to hit a child when you as an adult who has more control and more power will not tolerate it? So stop hitting your kids. Beating your kids as a way of disciplining them is a cop-out. That is a cheap way of parenting. It's that you don't know what to do. And so the best thing to control your child's behavior is to use fear to control. And the thing about using fear to control people is that there is no respect that will be given to you. They will just be afraid of you. And when people are afraid of you, the likelihood of them betraying you or going against your wishes is very, very likely. You're trying to get respect from people. You don't do that by using fear. Fear does not create respect. It only just builds more fear and a space for betrayal. So physical abuse can cause trauma. If you were hit as a child, please do not think, people say that, oh, I was beat as a child, my parents hit me so much, and I think that that's what helped me become the person I am today. It did not. That definitely had a negative effect on you. Look at the way you deal with authority figures. The moment you're talking to your friend, if that friend just does their hand in the air, they may not even be trying to hit you, or they'll just raise their hand. You just notice that they flinch. If you want to see it, a child that is being physically abused at home, just raise your hand towards the child and see what that child does. If the child flinches or moves back immediately, there is something going on at home. So physical abuse, there's psychological abuse, gaslighting, where parents be like, no, I never said that to you. That's a lie, you're lying. Verbal abuse, where child, you're good for nothing. You would never do well in school. You're never going to amount to anything. Look at your work, not even just for kids, even in the office, at home with your partner, you can experience verbal abuse. And there's sexual abuse, family members, strangers, colleagues in the office. There's sexual assault where you're being fondled or touched inappropriately, even though you have consistently given consent that you're not interested in, just the person still insists on trying to have sexual relations with you. Then there is traffic collisions, when you're on the road just driving and then, a bike runs into your car. That can actually be a traumatic experience. Having accidents on the road can be a traumatic experience. Childbirth can be a traumatic experience for some women. So you're giving birth to a child, the experience of giving birth, it's not a normal thing that people don't just go around giving birth to children. So it can be traumatizing. Trying to get the whole ass human being out of your body and having to go through tears, the pain you experience, the headaches. Some women pass out. Some women bleed, some women have to go into surgery. So childbirth can be traumatic, that if after childbirth, they then have postpartum depression, or they even develop some sort of psychotic breakdown. So childbirth can be traumatizing. A life-threatening illness, like having COVID, for example. During 2020, the earlier times when COVID was so much of a death threat that when people, if you have COVID, that's it, you're dead. That's how people felt. So the moment they get COVID, it's life-threatening. It can be traumatic because it's so stressful. You're afraid for your life. If you even have a terminal illness like cancer or HIV, that in itself can be a traumatic experience. The sudden loss of a loved one. You're just sitting down here, someone calls you, your dad is dead, your mom is dead, your lover is dead, your child is dead, even if it's your pet. People estimate how much losing a pet can affect a person's life. Your fish dies, or your dog dies, or your cat dies. That can be a traumatic event. Grief can become traumatic as well. So the loss of a loved one, being attacked, being robbed, walking down the road and someone pulls out a knife at you or pulls out a gun at you, being kidnapped, like the person who shared before, being kidnapped in a taxi or even at home, you're just on your own and then people just, come up and take you away from your safe space, acts of terrorism, explosions, natural disasters, like when rain falls and then there's like a huge flood in Lagos and people's houses are sinking in water, people don't know where to get food from, they are struggling for their lives. That can actually cause a traumatic event, traumatic experience, and they're going through like a war, like a civil war. Please ask your parents how they're doing, because a lot of people who were alive during the Biafran time don't talk about their experiences enough, and it has leaked into how they parent and how they show up in their daily life. And I feel like a lot of children now millennials and Gen Zs are experiencing residual effects from their parents not doing the work of dealing with what happened in the 60s and the 70s. So these are some of the traumatic events, some of the traumatic experiences that can cause a person to experience trauma. You could have witnessed it happening to somebody else. You can witness someone going through COVID, someone losing a loved one, someone being kidnapped or attacked, or you're caring for them. And that in itself would also cause you to feel traumatized. Yeah. So now the next thing to go to is, how do we treat trauma? There are several different treatments for it. So the first line of treatment is always therapy. The moment we know somebody has gone through trauma, the first thing we do is try to get them with therapy. So you need to work with, like I said, a trauma-informed or a trauma-focused therapist. Not every therapist deals with trauma. So you need to make sure that before you get into therapy, you ask your therapist if they work with people who are going through or who have experienced traumatic events. So when you go into therapy, some of the methods that you can use in therapy is CBT, just to help you change the way you think about the experience, your behaviors, and then your emotions. Like the person who said that they struggle with getting into a car alone after experiencing a kidnapping, they would end up, like, CBT would be very beneficial for you, just to help change your behavior and your emotional response and your thought patterns whenever you're in a car. Then they have an eye movement desensitization processing. So it's like you're relieving the traumatic experience, but what you do is that your therapist helps to direct your eye movement. It's a little bit how do I say, confusing to explain. I don't know how to explain, but then there is Emdr, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So by controlling your eye movement, they help you process and integrate your traumatic memories. Then you can also use like somatic therapy, which is using your body and your mind as a way of processing trauma. So you can either do like Reiki, therapeutic touch therapy. You can hear about people who use like there's like breathing exercises. I think I remember watching there's this trauma healing methods that has to do with the body and how you breathe, and not having to relieve it, but releasing the symptoms of trauma through body movement. So it's like relieving the traumatic experience in a safe space that's guided with the therapist, but focusing more on the body far much more than the mind. Now, there isn't any drug that can cure trauma. So there's no pill that if you go to your psychiatrist and say, I'm experiencing trauma, they'll give you a drug and say, okay, take this and the trauma will go away. No. But what we can do is that we can use drugs to help manage some of the symptoms of trauma. So we can put you on anti-anxiety medication, we can put you on mood regulators, antidepressants, and even help you get drugs to help you sleep better, because your sleep is very important when it comes to the regulation of your mood. So yeah, so those are some of the treatments that we have for trauma. But if you want to take care of yourself in the absence of a therapist, you can do some self-care things like exercise. So exercise is really good because it can help you to manage your fight or flight response and sort of release any of your, tense energy that you have in your body. Okay, are you with me, Faye? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, I'm here. I'm right here.
Okay. I was just checking.
I hear you.
All right, so you can also do exercise. Sorry?
Oh, there's a lag, but I hear you and I see you perfectly.
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay. So something that you can do to take care of yourself in the absence of a therapist or even with therapy is exercise. I recommend that you do yoga, because what yoga does is that it helps you stretch and helps you to release anxious feelings and also helps you deal with your breathing. So it teaches you how to breathe and how to remain calm. So you can do exercise, going out for a walk or, running, going to the gym to help sort of process some of those anxious energy, or you can also do yoga. You can practice mindfulness, which is, being grounded in the present time, because whenever you're relieving traumatic experiences like flashbacks are happening or nightmares, you're going to the past. You're living in the past. Your mind is focused on the past. So what you can do is bring yourself to the present time by doing things like looking around you. What can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I feel? Or even just going outside. If you find yourself in a place where you're uncomfortable, take off your shoes, go outside and step on the floor, just so that you can feel something in your present environment. You can even go for a cold shower just to shock you back into reality. So practicing mindfulness, mindful breathing, and mindful exercises can help you as well. Then also connecting with other people and talking about the challenges that you have. If it is too difficult for you to talk about it, that's okay, but don't isolate yourself. The immediate response when a person has experienced a traumatic event is to isolate themselves from other people so that they can be with themselves and, you know, deal with all of the feelings that they're having. But it is very, very important that you're connecting with your friends and that you're connecting with your family, or at least speaking to a therapist. That can really, really help you prevent that traumatic event from becoming full-blown PTSD. So when something happens to you, you connect with your family, you talk to your friends, you tell them what's going on with you. That can really help to relieve some of the symptoms so that you don't end up developing PTSD, because PTSD is not a nice illness to live with, honestly. So talk to them about it and open up and join a support group like Obudo, where you can freely share with people who are going through the same experiences that you are. And you know that they will understand, because that's one of the problems people have with sharing their experiences, is that if I tell people, they wouldn't get what I'm talking about, they wouldn't understand what I'm saying. But when you join a support group, you can talk to people who have experienced what you've experienced, and they will be in a better position to assist you. And then maintain a very, very healthy balanced lifestyle. So try to sleep for 7 to 9 hours. If you're having issues with sleeping, speak to your doctor about it so they can prescribe some helpful herbal medication to help you sleep well. Try to eat a balanced diet. Make sure you're eating a lot of food with protein inside of it. There are diets that are focused for people who are healing for trauma. Don't do a lot of carbs. Do food that has fiber. Do a lot of food that has protein. So you're eating meat, fish, boiled egg, beans, legumes, vegetables, fruits, because trauma has an effect on your body physically, especially with your stomach, your gastrointestinal issues. Like you start getting gut issues, you're having, heartburn all the time. So make sure you're eating well enough to help your body. Avoid alcohol, avoid drugs, because what they do is they just temporarily numb the pain. They don't permanently take it away. So try as much as possible to stay away from engaging in unhealthy ways of coping, and try to do things that make you happy. Go see a movie, take a nice walk, smell flowers, go to a flower shop and just sit down there. More proteins, less carbs, more vegetables. So things like grape, peaches, cherries, pears, like avocado, vegetables like kale, spinach, which is green in the market, apples, oranges, tomatoes, potatoes, all of these things, legumes like chickpeas and soya peas and soya beans and lentils, all these kinds of diet, like having them in your gut, in your food, cheese, milk, chamomile tea, nuts, granules, green vegetable. Like if you even want to have soup, make sure it's vegetable soup that you're eating. Something that just really has a lot of vegetables inside can help you to heal from trauma, because it would reduce the feeling of stress. Like, have you ever had sometimes when you eat some food, like maybe bread or you eat that, but then you just feel very uncomfortable inside and very heavy and just stressed out? So eating food that's healthy like that can help, that's not damaging to the gut, can be very helpful. So prioritize eating healthy food, green vegetables like that. Chamomile tea can help to calm you down. Taking supplementary vitamins and minerals, because for some of us, we can get all the vitamins we need if we're just eating right, but some of us still don't have access to the right kind of food, or we just don't even make the right decisions when it comes to what we need to eat. So you can have like supplement vitamins, either you take them as pills or you can have them injected into your body. So just try to eat a very healthy diet when you're trying to heal from trauma, because your body needs it. The same way you're trying to get over painful situations in your mind and you train yourself to think differently and in a healthy way, it's the same way your body is also trying to do the same thing. So it needs all of those nutrients to sort of help to replenish those old cells that are dying away and new ones are being born. You need your protein for that. So eat a lot of healthy food, eat protein, fish that has omega-3 fatty acids inside of them, and having a healthy diet will be very helpful. Then, like I said before as well, avoid alcohol and drugs. a glass of wine is nice, a glass of whiskey is nice, but then don't overdo it to the point where all you need to, every day you're drinking, you're going to like a whole bottle of alcohol. The moment you're doing that, you know that there's a problem somewhere and you need to talk to somebody. Then also relieve stress in your mind by doing enjoyable activities like going to the movies, going on a stroll with a friend that you feel safe with, just hanging out with your friends. You don't always have to go out. Sometimes you can create the safe space in your own space. Like you can, for example, invite your friends over. Something I do with I used to do, I think about 2 years ago, we had this thing we used to call the potluck, where we knew we had people who didn't know how to socialize. They didn't know how to make friends. They didn't know where to go to make friends. So what we did was that we decided to organize a potluck. So we'll find a location, a space, and we'll tell people, you're free to come, but everybody brings food and everybody brings drinks to share with other people. And it was so nice because it was like a community. Relationships were born out of that. Friendships were born out of that. Work connections were born out of that. Just being able to bring people together. So you don't necessarily have to go on your phone and look for an event to attend. You can just decide, find a friend who has a really big space, invite as many people as you know, probably even put on your social media, I'm having a potluck, tell people to bring food and to bring drinks that they'll be able to share. Some people will bring a whole box of pizza, some people will bring donuts and snacks, some people will even bring home cooked food for you because they want you to try something that they've made and they want to know, like, does it taste good, does it taste nice? And just getting that validation that they do really well can really boost their self-esteem. So you don't have to go out to be able to bring to have a social life. You can create it indoors with a controlled group of people. So avoid alcohol and drugs, do things that make you happy, go to the park. I know there are not a lot of parks in Lagos, but there are some. There's like a Canon DBC park in
Go to the beach.
Sorry?
You could go to the beach.
You can go to, exactly, you can go to the beach. You can sit at the beach and just watch the waves go by. And Nigerian beaches are interesting. It's not just empty land. There are things you can do. There are cabanas you can sit at, drinks you can buy, food you can, people to entertain you as well, kids just playing around. So you can go to the beach as well and just spend some time with yourself. So do things that make you happy. Don't isolate yourself. Talk to people, join a support group, start therapy, and you can actually live and overcome trauma. Now, one thing I'll tell you is that even though you've overcome trauma, like the flashbacks will not stop coming. There'll be moments where things will happen to remind you of it. Like when I was growing up as a kid, my parents were the kind of people that would beat kids because, well, that's the way they knew how to discipline. They didn't know any better. So what they did to correct you was to beat kids. And when they see when I watch other people get beat because of what they had done, that was how part of my own trauma was formed. So sometimes I'd be in my house, and the place I used to live in before, my neighbor used to beat his kid like the kid was a criminal. And I'll just be there. And the moment I start hearing this child crying, my response is to freeze, which has always been my response as a child. So it's just to freeze because I feel that sense of helplessness and I can't do anything about it. One day, I actually went to go and fight one woman that was beating her child, but the girl was bleeding. I fought, like, if you see the way this woman was looking at me, like she wants to beat me, I told her that if she tries, I'm going to take your child away from you. I'm going to call the police and take your child away from you. She looked so angry, like so much rage in her eyes. Like you could see, like, what did the child do? She was
probably traumatized.
Yeah.
She's probably did something, taking it out on.
Exactly. And so she was taking it out on the child. So she couldn't even see herself. Like she couldn't see what she was doing. And when I looked into her eyes, it was like she was blind. She couldn't, and that's what they say when you have like blinding rage. She was blind. She couldn't, the only thing that she could see was, I need to beat this child to make sure that she gets the message that I'm trying to pass across. So sometimes I fight, sometimes I freeze. So the responses, they would change over time. Sometimes they would be easier for you to cope with, sometimes they wouldn't be. But going through therapy would make it that the times when you're able to cope with triggers in your environment is better. You can't tell the world to stop triggering you. You can't tell the world to stop being what it is. But what you can do is learn how to cope a lot better. So you would have the flashbacks, you will have the triggers, but they would not paralyze you to the point where you can't function anymore. You can't do the things that you need to do. So I always tell people that the one thing about trauma is that the memory doesn't go away. But the thing is that the effect that the memory has on you would not be as intense as it did in the beginning. So you can think of it as, wow, so that thing actually happened to me in my life, man. That's just
Yeah.
sad. But you know, it is what it is, and I would move on. It wouldn't dictate the way you see yourself, how you show up for yourself and for other people in your life. So yeah, so those are all I have for treating traumas. Yeah. And if anyone has any questions, I will definitely go on the Oando YouTube and just check to read whatever questions people have left in the comment section. And you can also send me DMs as well. And I'll be more than happy to help answer them, to help provide you clarity. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you everyone who has attended. This is our final session. This is our final session. I'm so sad because I've actually had the best time. But I've had the best time, you know, just sitting and speaking with you. It's been really informative. I've actually, I've sent the links to all my family members. I'm like, you need this education because we're all dealing with one thing or the other. You never know until you start to educate yourself that, wow, okay, I'm actually going X, Y, or Z. So at the end of the session, yes, we need you to help us with our survey. We will probably send it to you, to all the participants. So just fill out the survey, let us know what you think so that we can bring back more sessions like this. And you can also follow us on social media at Oando_PLC. And we're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and it's all Oando PLC. So thank you again, Amanda. It's been an amazing time. Thank you, wonderful.
Gone by so quickly.
Yeah, I know. It was just like yesterday we started.
Yes,
right.
like look at that. All right, then take good care of yourself and have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.